Pentagon power shift. Ashton Carter nominated to head the sprawling Defense Department. Successful launch. Today's Orion test flight brings NASA one step closer to putting mankind on Mars. No ordinary tree. The national Christmas tree is a cut above. And Mandela remembered. 1 year after his death, we look back at the legacy of a leader. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Friday, December 5th, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. A new report shows the United States economy is growing at a strong pace. In fact, 2014 is on track to be the best year for U.S. job gains in 15 years. Wyatt Goolsbee looks at the numbers tonight.
It's being called boom-like numbers. The U.S. Labor Department counts more than 321,000 jobs created in November, keeping the unemployment rate at a 6-year low of 5.8%. From retail to transportation and warehousing, a wide variety of industries have been hiring.
It's not that we're just producing low-paying jobs, but we're now producing high-paying and middle-paying jobs. The job gains are very, very broad-based and really across the board.
With such strong numbers, the president today asked the newly elected members of Congress to help him keep it up. The new report comes as welcome news to more than a dozen employment candidates here in Washington about to enter or rejoin the workforce. Catholic Charities DC just wrapped up an extensive 5-week employment training boot camp, which prepares and connects students to a variety of jobs in retail, construction, and service industries. Mark Harrison runs the charity's employment program and says signs the economy is growing are good, but a goal with their program is to emphasize multiple skill sets.
We can have somebody who may come in thinking, oh, I want to be a construction worker. But by the time we sit down with them in the 5 weeks, we start pulling out other skills. You know, I want to be a construction worker, but next thing you know, you have a background in customer service. So we then kind of move that transition, say, hey, well, I have a job for you in customer service where your paycheck may be a whole lot greater. You also have the opportunity for career advancement. So it's really getting them to think outside of the box.
Catholic Charities here in D.C. primarily places candidates in entry to mid-level jobs, and at this point, the average paycheck doesn't appear to be going up. Economists also say many of those jobs added in November are seasonal jobs, so they don't anticipate the same high level of growth to continue at that rate. But in general, today's report is seen as a good one for the U.S. Brian.
Good to get some good news. Thank you, Wyatt. Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. The FBI is investigating the death of a Kansas City teenager as a potential hate crime. The Muslim teen was struck by an SUV outside a Somali community center yesterday. Police say the driver appeared to ram the teen intentionally as he was getting into a car, nearly severing the boy's legs. The boy died later at the hospital. A 30-year-old suspect was arrested trying to run from the scene. Well, it was a textbook mission for NASA and its new Orion spacecraft today. Orion beat the weather odds for a morning liftoff from Florida's Cape Canaveral. Over its 4.5-hour mission, Orion flew farther, faster than any capsule built for humans since the Apollo moon missions. The capsule returned to Earth with a splash landing in the Pacific, completing its test mission. NASA hopes Orion will be the vehicle to take humans to Mars in the coming decades. A superstorm heads for the Philippines. Typhoon Hagupit is expected to come ashore this weekend. Millions are taking shelter, boarding up homes, and preparing sandbags. Memories are still fresh from last year's super typhoon. It left more than 7,000 people dead or missing. Catholic Relief Services tells EWTN News Nightly it's ready with emergency shelter, water purification, and hygiene kits. The agency has 200 staff members in the Philippines. They're asking all of us to pray for those in the path of the storm. When Pope Francis visits the Philippines early next year, his first Mass will not be open to the public. A Filipino news site reports it will be strictly limited to 2,000 priests, bishops, and religious. The rector of Manila Cathedral, where the Mass will be held, says the restriction is for safety reasons. 2 other papal Masses will be open to the public during the Pope's visit in mid-January. A Christmas campaign of prayer and solidarity is being launched for a Pakistani Christian woman on death row for blasphemy. The German section of the Pontifical Mission Societies is coordinating the campaign for Asia Bibi. The married mother of 5 was arrested in 2009 and sentenced to death the following year. The group is asking the German government to make every diplomatic effort to free Bibi. They also call for the abolishment of Pakistan's blasphemy law and for special prayers for Bibi during Advent and Christmas. The cardinal appointed by Pope Francis to oversee the Vatican's finances is now moving into the office of the president of the Vatican Bank. Cardinal George Pell heads a new finance ministry created to improve the Holy See's efficiency, accountability, and transparency. Writing in the UK's Catholic Herald, Cardinal Pell says the Holy See's finances are in better shape than he thought. He says the Vatican will follow international accounting standards and be transparent, using its proceeds to help the poor. Facing growing military threats in the Middle East, Russia, and North Korea, President Obama today nominates a new defense secretary, the 4th in just 6 years. Chief White House correspondent Suzanne LaFranchi has that story.
Today I'm pleased to announce my nominee to be our next Secretary of Defense, Mr. Ash Carter.
Although the 60-year-old physicist has extensive Pentagon experience, last serving as Deputy Defense Secretary, he's never served in the military. But Ash Carter is a widely respected academic.
He's a reformer who's never been afraid to cancel old or inefficient weapons programs. He knows the Department of Defense inside and out, all of which means that on day one, he's going to hit the ground running.
The Rhodes Scholar is known for his expertise on nuclear weapons, Iran, and North Korea. If confirmed, Carter would take over a Defense Department whose budget has undergone extensive cuts, making it more challenging to fight global threats, especially in the Middle East.
I pledge to you my most candid strategic advice. And I pledge also that you will receive equally candid military advice.
Conspicuously absent from the nomination ceremony was Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, who resigned under pressure last week. A defense spokesman said Hagel didn't want to distract from Carter's nomination.
Mr. Carter is respected in Congress on both sides of the aisle for his intellect and experience. He is expected to be approved by the Senate next month. However, it will give the Republicans an opportunity to grill the nominee on the Obama administration's foreign policy decisions. From the White House, Suzanne LaFranchi, EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks, Suzanne. The Department of Defense calls an increase in reporting of sexual assaults in the military progress. The Pentagon says the latest data shows fewer actual crimes committed but more people reporting. The military has launched dozens of new programs encouraging reporting since 2012, but congressional reaction to this report is mixed. A senator leading the fight for military justice reform sees the results as more troubling than positive. New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand says for the past 2 decades, leaders have spoken of zero tolerance, yet year after year, decade after decade, the scale of justice continues to lean in favor of the accused. Sarah Blum is a decorated Vietnam veteran, a psychotherapist, and author of Women Under Fire, Abuse in the Military. She's joining us by Skype from Auburn, Washington. And what is your reaction to this week's Department of Defense report, Sarah, that says that reporting is up, but the prevalence of sexual abuse in the military is actually down?
Well, I don't believe the way that they interpret it is actually correct. We have a serious problem with our military, and this report, in fact, all of the reports gave us a really chilling picture of our military's failure to deal effectively with its culture of abuse and sexual assault epidemic. They don't even acknowledge that they have a culture of abuse, but yet they do. And one of the figures that jumped out at me is the 62% retaliation rate for reporting, and that is the same number, the same percentage as in 2012.
Yes,
women are at
62% of women who have been sexually abused also experience retaliation, right?
When they report it. And that's some of the issue is reporting. And so they're at risk to go and report their sexual assault either to their rapist or to a leader who's covering up for the rapist. It's basically a failed system.
Now, I know you're working with New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand on some legislation. What is the goal of that legislation?
It's the Military Justice Improvement Act. And it's a fair, independent, impartial system of justice. And it's going to take reporting out of the chain of command so that women don't have to report sexual assault to the very person that assaulted them or one of the leaders that's covering up for the rapist.
You interviewed many women in this situation for your book, Women Under Fire, Abuse in the Military. Do you get a sense from them that there has been any improvement in this situation, or is it indeed worsening?
It actually is getting worse. In fact, over the years, it's gotten worse. And from 2000 on, it was at its absolute worst, and it has not stopped since then. In fact, even with these current numbers that we have, there are almost 6,000 reported cases, and only 359 were convictions. And we know that there are a lot of them that are not even being reported at all. And our system is biased against victims, then those numbers support that.
Well, it's certainly troubling, and I know that your book has a lot more detail about this. It's called Women Under Fire, Abuse in the Military. Sarah Blum, thank you for joining us from Washington State.
Thank you.
Known as the Queen of all Belgians, Queen Fabiola died today in her Brussels castle. The Queen was inseparable from her husband, the late King Baudouin. The two shared a deep belief in Roman Catholic values. The king faced controversy, refusing to sign an abortion legalization bill, and many have cited his Catholic faith for that decision. Queen Fabiola was 86. South Africans marked the first year since the passing of their former president, Nelson Mandela. The statesman died on this date a year ago at age 95, following a long illness. A ceremony was held today at the foot of a bronze Mandela statue. Family members and a fellow prison inmate attended. Mandela spent 27 years in prison under South Africa's segregationist apartheid regime. After his release, he was elected president in South Africa's first all-race election. The Anglican Archbishop Emeritus of Cape Town spoke fondly of his late friend.
I think the most important thing is to give thanks that God gave us this gift, and then say, God, we want to try and be worthy of this gift that you gave us.
Today's ceremony was followed by an interfaith service along with other remembrances throughout the country. Coming up, a brief history of the Christmas tree and its Christian roots. On Friday, December 5th, thanks for joining us for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. Well, the preacher to the papal household delivered his first Advent homily today. The theme was peace. Since 1980, Father Raniero Cantalamessa has preached weekly homilies during Advent and Lent in the presence of the Holy Father. Father Cantalamessa compares the relief brought by the Church's message of peace to the cry of armistice and peace after World War II ended in Italy. He said that in ages of anxiety, the Christmas message that God is at peace with mankind through Christ Jesus brings great hope. Well, the national Christmas tree here in Washington is now lit after last night's dazzling ceremony. That tree and the ones in our homes follow an old, deep tradition. Jason Calvi shares the history of the Christmas tree.
3, 2, 1.
Oh, National Christmas Tree. A grounded past, 9 decades in the making.
Dates back to 1923 when President Calvin Coolidge walked across from the White House here to the Ellipse and lit a tree from Vermont, his native state.
Through the years, the tree has gone up at several locations around the White House.
In the distance is a 60-foot spruce, which at the president's touch is illuminated with 9,000 lights.
And it's gone dark during national tragedies, like parts of World War II and during the Iran hostage crisis. The current tree is actually living. The 29-foot Colorado blue spruce was planted here in 2012.
And surrounding the national Christmas tree, hundreds of feet from the White House, are these little trees representing each of the states. But the tradition of the Christmas tree has much deeper roots.
History logs stories of bringing a tree inside.
So in the middle of a northern winter, lots of snowfall, you had a pine tree, a spruce tree, or a holly tree saying, "Don't be afraid. We guarantee that spring will be back. We've kept our leaves. We've kept green."
Jesuit Father Ronald Murphy is the author of a book explaining the pre-Christian Northern European legend of a tree rescuing humans at the end of time. He says missionaries converted that legend to explain Christianity.
We do believe that the cross performs that function, and we do believe that the church performs that function.
Catholics in places like Norway built churches resembling trees.
From roughly, let's say, 1150.
Father Murphy says decorations were added to the indoor trees by the 1600s. And today, about 80% of Americans put a tree up in their own homes, according to a 2013 Pew poll, and as seen in public places like on Capitol Hill.
2, 1.
And at the White House, celebrations growing for 2,000 years.
It's the story of hope. The birth of a singular child into the simplest of circumstances. A child who would grow up to live a life of humility and kindness and compassion.
In Washington, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Up next, hundreds of supporting roles to the three main characters make this nativity scene the largest ever. We're grateful you could join us for EWTN News Nightly tonight and each night this week. I'm Brian Patrick, and Pope Francis highlighted the importance of women in today's speech to the International Theological Commission. Now, this is a group of up to 30 theologians. They meet at least once a year over 5 years, tackling major issues of church doctrine. Pope Francis upped the number of women on this commission from 2 to 7, and the current commission begins its 5-year term this week. Commission members were expected to map out the topics that they'll address, but nothing has been made public just yet. This week, President Obama hosted more than 500 Native American tribal leaders at the White House. He pledged to improve dire conditions and create new opportunities for Native American youth. More than a third live in poverty, and only about 2/3 graduate from high school. 36 young ambassadors actually took part in the Tribal Nations Conference. The White House also released a report acknowledging failures in federal policy for Native Americans and promised improvement. Valerie Hauser is director of the government's Office of Native American Affairs, working to preserve tribes' historic and sacred sites. You were part of this White House conference. What did you hear, especially from these young people?
I heard two young women, two of the youth ambassadors, speak very impassioned about the need to protect sacred places because they draw their cultural identity from these places, and these young women were basically pleading with government officials like myself to help them protect these places. It's important to the health of tribal youth. It's important to the maintenance of their cultures and their peoples.
We all have sacred sites, many of us in our churches. What would you say constitutes a sacred site for a Native American tribe?
You have to think of those kinds of sacred sites a little bit differently than what most people are used to seeing. They're often not buildings, although many Native Americans practice the Christian faiths. But when we talk about sacred places, we're talking often about things in the natural world, that those of us that mountains, rivers, bodies of water, something that might be, places that might be familiar to your audiences include mountains in the Rocky Mountain Range, bodies of water like Nantucket Sound in Massachusetts. Those are sacred places for our Native peoples.
So is protecting the religious freedom of Native Americans much different from the battle that we all face over religious freedom?
I think that American Indians would tell you that their battles for religious freedoms go on today because they practice their faith on the land. They struggle to protect those places from ongoing development, so it's a very different kind of struggle. And they have to, it's something that they have to work on almost constantly, I think they would tell you.
Do you think if more Americans were aware of this, that they would have greater respect?
Absolutely. And that is something that the agency I work for and other major departments of the federal government are working on. We're going to produce this year information for the general public so they become aware of these kinds of places, so that they think more before they act or take an interest and learn more.
I often think that if we as an American people would treat our land the way the natives did, that we would have a better country. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's about balance and harmony.
All right. Well, we appreciate you being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Valerie Hauser, Director of the Government Office of Native American Affairs,
Thank you.
helping to preserve the tribe's historic and sacred sites.
Appreciate this opportunity.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Well, more than 1,000 people gathered recently in Utah, setting a new Guinness record for the largest live nativity scene. The event recreated the Bethlehem scene with 1,039 people dressed as angels, wise men, and religious royalty. A camel, donkey, and several sheep were also featured in this giant interfaith production. This tops last year's record of 898 people in a nativity scene in the UK. Our Katherine Zellner spoke with an organizer of this week's Utah event.
We're joined now by Daryl Eves, one of the producers behind this record-breaking nativity scene. Daryl, why put on this production?
Well, you know, we wanted to make a statement. We're seeing that the world's kind of changing, and they're looking at Christmas as a way to receive gifts, and it's about materialism. There's Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and we really wanted to make a statement to the world that, you know what, Christmas is about Jesus Christ, and it's about coming together and serving our Lord and Savior. And we just thought of different ways we could do that. And Jeff Taylor came up with a great idea to break a world record, to make this statement. And, you know, a few of us too decided, hey, you know, this is a great way to make a statement. And we can also make a YouTube video and get more people involved. And we were just super excited about this. And we're very passionate about this as well.
And I understand the event was planned in less than a month. What were the preparations like?
Well, it was really crazy, let me tell you. You know, in less than a month, it was like 3.5 weeks that we had to pull this together. We needed to pull at least 1,000 people together to break the world record and to get volunteers. But there was much more than that. We had to get a lot of people to sew costumes. Theron Harmon was able to pull volunteers together and sew over 1,000 costumes so that we're able to give people an angel costume so they could be a part of this great production.
Well, it was an incredible event, it looks like. Daryl Eves, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We want to thank you for joining us throughout the week in this first week of Advent. Don't forget, tomorrow is the Feast of St. Nicholas, from where our Santa Claus tradition comes. And we just appreciate you being with us throughout this week, and we look forward to seeing you on Monday. Until then, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Have a good weekend, good night, and may God bless you.